I am glad to be continuing in our parables series. We're doing this series because parables, Jesus taught over 30 parables in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so there's obviously something important about these parables. And as we study them, we are seeing and we will see that they're important because they are timeless and they speak to us where we're at in life. And they reveal things to us that we may not have seen otherwise. And so what a parable is, just kind of repeating what Myron said, it's a story that is intended to illustrate a point. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So like an analogy, like a metaphor, it is something that we can understand, or at least Jesus' first century audience could understand in their earthly experience, that translated to a heavenly truth. And so that's what a parable is. That's what it's all about. And I think that the purpose of our parable that we're going to study tonight, there's actually two purposes to it. One is to reveal to us God's heart for humanity, for people. And the second is to reveal to us the condition of our own hearts. And so we're going to dig into that and we're going to see how he's going to reveal that to us. And the parable that we are going to study tonight is definitely one of my favorites. It's one of the more famous ones in the Bible, and it's the parable of the prodigal son, or the parable of the lost son. And you guys have probably heard of a prodigal before. You see it in TV or see it in movies and someone's like, oh, the prodigal son returns, right? And so I think that we have a tendency to think that word prodigal is just a synonym for lost, or it means a son that has gone away and come back. But that's not actually what the word prodigal means. It actually means to spend excessively in like a lavish, excessive way. And that we do see illustrated in this parable, but I like the title better, The Lost Son. And we'll see why as we get into it. There's a little bit more, for me, there's a little bit more meaning to that. And I think there's more in this parable than just the prodigal nature of the son that we're going to see. And so Jesus sets the stage really nicely for us, or really just the setup is very clear for us because we find this parable in Luke chapter 15. And in verses 1 and 2, it gives us a picture of who's in the crowd, who's in the audience, who's Jesus talking to, and what is he addressing. And so let's take a look at that before we dive into the parable itself. Luke 15, verse 1, it says, now the tax collectors and sinners, and it's got sinners in quotes. So the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. So the tax collectors, what this is talking about is, this was ancient Israel. They were under the dominion of the empire of Rome. And so the tax collectors were Israelite people who'd been employed by the Roman Empire to collect taxes for the Roman Empire. So they were disliked because of that alone. But not only that, but they were empowered to take additional money to pad their own pockets, to improve the quality of their own lives at their discretion. And so they were some of the most disliked people in Israel, in ancient Israel. And then the sinners that it's talking about here, these are the people that would have been rejected by Jewish religious society, by the people in the synagogues. This is the prostitutes, this is the party people, this is the heavy drinkers, this is the homeless folks. This is the people that the religious folks thought were, you got to stay away from them. Hey, I wouldn't want to hang out with those people. That's what he's talking about when he says that's what the Bible's talking about when it says the tax collectors and sinners. And what's crazy about this is that these people were the people to avoid, the untouchables, and yet they were flocking to Jesus, to hear his teaching, to get close to him, to learn from him. And the other type of person in the crowd, it tells us in verse 2, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And so the Pharisees are the religious priests in the synagogues, the centers of worship in ancient Israel. They also hold some political power in ancient Israel. And so as we look back at the Bible now, we know the Pharisees as self-righteous. We know them as self-justifying. We know them as hypocritical, judgmental, and they think they consider themselves to be morally superior to others. And they looked down upon the common folk of Israel, and especially upon these sinners in the crowd. They're known for cleaning up the outside and looking very pious and holy, but really we know that behind the scenes there was some shady stuff going on, some, swindling of the poor and tricking and just using their power for their own advantage. This is who the Pharisees were, and really what they say illustrates their posture of their heart perfectly. Their judgmental tone. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. They are turning up their noses at this crowd. And so whether it's by actually hearing the commentary of the Pharisees in the crowd or by Jesus' divine power to know the condition of their hearts, he addresses this comment and this posture of their hearts that they are approaching this moment with. And that's the context that we're stepping into this parable. That's what he's addressing as he tells us this story. And so in verse 11, he actually tells three parables, and we're just going to look at the third one, the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. And it starts in verse 11. And so this is what it says. It says, Jesus continued, because he had just told two parables. So Jesus continued. There was a man who had two sons. All right, so when we look at cultural context of ancient Israel, this is the Middle East, essentially. And so the culture of the ancient Middle East was patriarchal, meaning that the oldest living male member in a family was the one who was the leader of the family. They held the keys to the economic systems of the society. They were the ones with the power to even enforce legal authority over the people in their house, in their family. They were the ones who led their family, right? So it was the patriarch. And the second thing about this patriarchal culture is that that position was passed down from father to typically to the oldest, the firstborn son. And so it says this was a father with two sons. Now, the way this would go, because the oldest son was going to step, whenever his father died, the oldest son would step into the shoes of the father as the patriarch of his family. He would get 2 shares of the inheritance when the father died. So he would split his inheritance amongst his sons, but the oldest one would get more than the younger sons. And so that sets up a little bit of what we're looking at here. So there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Now, I feel like the Bible, because it's written in a different time, different place, different culture, sometimes it's not very colorful. Sometimes it's not very descriptive. This is one sentence statement that we can just kind of breeze by. But if you're sitting in the crowd that Jesus is teaching, this is a shocking statement to you. And you're like, what? He said, what? Because think about it. What he just did, you're supposed to get the inheritance from your father when he died. And so what he just said to his father is, hey, Dad, I've been waiting around for you to die, but that's not happening fast enough. So why don't you just give me what you're going to owe me now? He's saying, hey, you're worth more to me dead than alive. Our relationship has just been a means to an end, and I'm tired of waiting. Can we just give me my inheritance? This is incredibly insulting. This is a total rejection of the father's love. And it's humiliating towards the father. And what would be expected of an ancient Middle Eastern patriarch in a situation like this, with his adult son disrespecting him like this, would be that he would respond with a verbal or likely a physical beating of his son, and maybe even be disowned from the family, be kicked out of the family, and have his inheritance revoked from him. And so that's what this crowd would be expecting, the father's response to this unbelievable statement of disdain towards this father. But what does the father do? Instead, it says, so he divided his property between them, between his sons. It's telling us he gave the son what he asked for. He gave him his inheritance. And this is pretty intense, because it's not like this guy just had a big bank account sitting full of cash and he just withdrew it or transferred it over to his son's bank account. Like, his net worth was tied up in his land that he owned. It was tied up in the livestock that he owned and the other possessions. There was some coinage, there was some cash, but it was largely tied up in his estate. And so in order to give his son, who would have gotten 1/3 of the inheritance, 1/3 of all he owned, He probably had to parcel out his land and give it to the son, or sell some of his land to give his son the cash, sell some of the livestock. And so this father graciously, when he should respond in anger and beating and punishment and rejection, he responds with grace, and he endures one of the most painful things a human heart can endure, which is the pain of rejected love, of loving his son and not having that love returned. And that's what the father does. And so, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So, whether he received the inheritance in land and livestock, or the father did all the selling and gave him the money, whatever the case, he liquidated it, made cash out of it, stuffed it in a bag, and said, I'm out of here. And he went as far as he could away from his father, away from his family, away from his home, so that he could go live life his own way. What he did was, it says that he squandered his wealth in wild living. What's insinuated here, and we'll see it later whenever we hear what the older brother has to say about it, is that he was spending that money on prostitutes. He was probably spending that money gambling. He was probably spending that money seeking out the next biggest party. He was living for himself. He was pursuing sin, living in this worldly lifestyle, looking for pleasure in the party, for life in the debauchery. He went to Vegas and believed the lie that everything, whatever happens in Vegas, stays there. And so he squandered his entire inheritance, this money that his father had saved up his whole life to pass down to his son. He squandered it in wild living. And so it says, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. And so this guy's in a desperate situation. Like, he spent all the money that he had, and so when he goes to get a job, there's a famine and no one's hiring because they don't want to pay someone to mow their lawn. They don't want to pay someone to do the yard work or to do the housework. It's a famine. They're going to hoard their resources, hoard the food, make sure they can feed their family, make sure they can last it out. So there's no jobs available, but he's got no food. He's got to find a way to feed himself because he played all his money away. And so this is how desperate he is. And this next part, this is where if you're sitting in the crowd Jesus is teaching, your reaction to this would be like, oh, like what? And so it says this, it says, once he began in need, he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And for these people, this would have been such a shocking reaction because the pigs in Israelite society and Jewish society, and you even see it in modern Judaism, that it's considered an unclean animal. And I believe it was the most unclean animal. And so to step in and work with the pigs was the lowest, the dirtiest, the worst job you could get. You had to work with an animal that was considered ceremonially and physically unclean. You had to get into the mix of that. It is the lowest job he could take, but that's how desperate he was to find a way to feed himself. That's the destitute situation that he found himself in. And it goes even further. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Have you ever watched a movie where they feed the pigs or seen it? It's not a 5-course meal. It's scraps, it's garbage, it's mixed together. Pigs will eat anything. And he's looking at this and he's like, I wish I could eat that. That's how desperate he is. This guy is at rock bottom. He has hit his lowest low. Have you been there? Are you there right now? Are you looking for a way out? He certainly was. It says, when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? He looks back at his life, he looks at his situation, feeding the pigs, living the low life, and he's like, the servants at my home, my father's house, were living a better life than me. They were getting paid better than me. They have a life, they have a job. And so he comes up with a plan. He says, I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he comes up with a plan. He's like, I'm rejected from my family, disowned. I can't go back and become a part of my family. But maybe if I go back and I beg and I tell my father that I'm sorry and I plead, maybe he'll apprentice me to one of his servants. Because I would have a better life then than I do now if he would just do that. So he writes his speech, he gets his plan together, and he heads off back home. And it says, so he got up and went to his father. And then maybe one of the most incredible parts of this parable, it says, so we have a scene change. We're going to go back to the house where the father is. We're leaving the younger son and we're going back to the house. And from his perspective, here we are. It says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. How do you see someone from a long way off? You have to be looking for him. His father was looking for his son to return. Like, we don't know how long he was gone. We don't know how long it took to get back, but his father was looking for him, and while he was still a long way off, he saw him coming. And here's the other crazy thing. Again, if you're sitting in this crowd, you would understand this. An ancient Middle Eastern patriarch does not run. It's undignified. It was considered something that someone of lower status would do. Because he would have to pull up his robes and his bare legs would show, and that was not something that a dignified patriarch would do. They did not run. But what does the father do? He sees his son coming, he gets up, he abandons his dignity, he abandons his pride, and he leaves it all behind. He takes the humility and he runs to his son who is coming back home. And so, he gets to him and he throws his arms around him and he kisses him. And the son, he's planned out his speech, right? And so he's going to launch into it. He's like, it says, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Did you guys catch it? His speech plan was to say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And he finished by, make me like one of your hired men. But then when he's giving the speech, he gets through, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And his father, at least the way I read it, he interrupts him. He's like, no, shh, like, I don't care. You're back, you're home. I love you. You're welcome. You're safe. Hey, like, bring a robe, bring the ring, put it on his finger. This ring would have been like a family crest. This was a signal that he was, once again, part of the family. This was reinstilling his identity as a member of the family, as a son of the father. The son couldn't even get his apology out. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to earn anything. The father ran to him and added him back into his family without a second thought. And he throws a party. The other thing, the fattened calf, like, you know, we kind of breeze by that. But okay, listen, I bought a half a cow for the first time in my life in November, all right? And this was so much meat. Like, when it showed up, I had bought an 18 cubic foot freezer to put this meat in when it showed up. And I tried 3 different times to arrange it so that I could get it all in the freezer, and I could not fit a half a cow in this massive freezer. So that night, I had to go to the store, buy another freezer so that I could keep all of this meat frozen and not let it go to waste. That is a half a cow. So this is an exorbitant expenditure that the father made right here. And much even more, the Middle Eastern culture, they didn't eat meat very much. It was a delicacy. It was something special. So this was an extravagance. This was the nicest meat. This was the freshest. They had been fattening the calf. This was an extravagant meal, an extravagant party, an extravagant expenditure on the son who had gone and blown it all. So this is a party. They probably invited the whole neighborhood, the whole town to come and celebrate. And so we have one more scene change here. And we're going to change scene over to the older brother, the older son. He's going to get introduced into the story. And this is what it says. While they're celebrating in the house, meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back, safe and sound. So what's the older brother going to do here? How's he going to react? Is he going to celebrate? Is he going to be like, my brother's back? I mean, I know, like, my parents may not know what he did, but I know what he was doing when he was gone. I know what he ran off to. But he's back, he's safe and sound, he's come back. Like, I'm missing out on the party. I got to go get ready. I got to go to the party. Is that how he reacts? No. See, the older brother shows his cards. He reacts with the anger of entitlement. And this is what goes down. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and you never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? And so he lets it rip on the father. Like I said, he's got the anger of entitlement. This is, again, just like the younger son, this is an incredible insult to this father, because in this day and time, a son would not address his father like this. He would address him as father or another title of respect. But to say, look you, is belittling, it's humiliating, it's disrespectful. And so in the same way, this would have resulted in a verbal rebuke or in a physical beating by the father of this son. And yet again, how do we see this gracious, patient father react to the son who's just disrespected him in such a great way? He says, my son, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So the father responds with grace, he responds with patience, and he responds with love. This term that our version translates as my son could be even my child. Like, he responds to his son in love, not in punishment, not in retaliation, not in anger, but in love and in grace. And he's pleading with him. He invites him to come in, and he's like, your brother's alive and well. We've got to celebrate. And that's where this parable ends. So, this is a earthly story intended to illustrate a heavenly meaning. So I want to dig into, I think there's 5 important symbols in this parable that are going to help us understand what this is all about, how this is revealing the Father's heart for people, and how this is revealing the condition of our own hearts. And so the first symbol in this story is the Father. And the Father is God. The Father represents God. He is the owner of the inheritance. He is the leader of the family. He is the one who can give or take away from the sons. So the Father represents God. The second symbol is the inheritance. And the inheritance represents our lives. See, we're the sons in this story. You and I, the people, we are the sons. And so the inheritance that the Father gives to his 2 sons, that is representative of our lives, what we've been given by God. Our lives, our talents, our skills, our abilities, our resources, that is what this inheritance represents. The third symbol is the party at the end of the story, the party in the house with the young son coming home. And what this party symbolizes is salvation. It symbolizes the state of knowing God and living our lives with him in our lives as we're called to do, living out our purpose in a relationship with our Heavenly Father, and the guaranteed assurance of our future in heaven with our Father where we belong. That's what salvation is. That's what this party in the house represents. It's salvation. And then we come to the sons. And the sons are our next two symbols. Now, the interesting thing about these sons is that they both showed us in this story that they both wanted the father's stuff, but they didn't want the father. They wanted the inheritance, but they didn't want the father. And so the fourth symbol that I want to illustrate is the younger son. And the younger son, he wanted the father's stuff but didn't want the father. And the way that he tried to get it was by demanding it, by taking it and saying, this is mine. I'm going to go live my life. I'm getting as far away from you as I can, and I'm going to do it my way. He pursued sin. He tried to attain his stuff. He tried to get his inheritance by pursuing pleasure, by living life his way, by pursuing what the world had to offer, by squandering it in gambling and prostitution and drinking, partying, living it up, you name it. Is that you? Are you the younger son? Like, is that what you've done? Have you run from the Father? Have you lived according to the worldly ways? Are you pursuing sin, and how's that going? Like, are you finding life that you thought you would find? And it's not just parties, it's not just sex, it's not just drinking. Like, have you gotten to the point where you think that Jesus can't help with your depression? Right? Like this lifestyle takes lots of different forms. But are you pursuing that? Are you the younger son? Have you run far from the Father? Have you spat in his face? Have you disrespected him in that way? The good news for the younger brother, if that's you, is that he's not mad at you. God's not mad at you. This father illustrated this. He's not mad at you. He hasn't disowned you. He's waiting desperately for you to come home. He's looking out on the horizon, wondering when you're going to show up. He wants you just to come back home. And here's what's crazy is he didn't even give the son time to get cleaned up. He didn't give the son time to apologize, to work his way back into the family. No, like he literally just reinstated him because he came home. The father ran to the son. And here's how this illustrates the gospel, right? God saw our condition. He saw that we're living in sin apart from him. He saw that even the one sin that we might have committed, if you lied today, if you gossiped today, if you lusted today, if you were jealous, if you were greedy today, that one sin is enough that we would never be able to repay it. We would never be able to earn our way into heaven, into God's good graces again, because one sin is so heavy, so evil, so broken that there's no way we could repay it. And so God saw our condition, saw that we had a debt we would never be able to repay. And so he ran after us. He stepped into our stories in the flesh as his son Jesus. And he came and he lived a perfect life with no sin, so that he could go and die. A death that he did not deserve, so that he could pay a debt that we owed but could never repay. That's what Jesus did for the Son. And that's the Father running to the Son. That's him running after you. The Father is running to you. And so going back to the crowd that's hearing this parable, the younger son, like, this is for the sinners. This is for the tax collectors in that crowd. Jesus is saying, like, hey, don't listen to those Pharisees. I'm here for you. I want you in my kingdom. I'm looking for you to just come home. And the fifth symbol, and this is why I like the parable titled The Lost Son, because this isn't the story of the younger son's extravagance and his restoration back home, this is the story of two sons, both of whom were lost. This is the parable of the lost sons. Because the fifth symbol is the older brother. And in the same way, just like the younger brother, he wanted the father's stuff, but he didn't want the father. But he tried to get it a different way. See, he tried to get it by being good. He tried to get it by being obedient. He tried to get it by being righteous, being perfect, always doing the right thing, trying to achieve the father's inheritance and own the father's inheritance by his goodness. And we see it the way he reacted. See, he thought he was entitled to what the father owned because he had obeyed, because he had stayed, because he'd played his role, because he'd done the right thing. See, that was me, guys. Like in my story, I was the older brother. I was raised a Christian boy. I was a good boy. Like I got good grades. I didn't cuss. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink, et cetera, et cetera. Like my life was all about being good so that other people could see perfect Ryan, to see how good he was. But the crazy thing is, I was just like the older brother because I was judgmental towards the younger brothers in my life. I was judgmental, I was cruel, I was hypocritical, and I thought that my goodness had earned God's special favor on me. And it wasn't, and this was best illustrated by, I went to college and I played tennis, and my teammates, they were a bunch of younger sons. They were out, they were getting drunk every weekend night, they were showing up to practice hungover, barely put themselves together, their clothes were mismatched, right? Like they were sleeping with women after women after women. And the word that I always used when I talked about them was idiots. Those idiots. Ryan, what's your team up to tonight? I don't know. They're probably just being idiots. Ryan, why don't you hang out with your teammates more? They're idiots, And my sophomore year of college, God revealed my older brotherness to me through a movie. And in one night, like he changed my perspective to see that, hey, everybody has a story. And you may know their story or you may never know their story, but whatever the case, there is something behind their actions. And you can love them for that. And you can love them through that. You can stop judging. You can stop thinking that you're self-righteous over that person. But see, my older brotherness wasn't over yet, because although God changed my heart towards people, it was another 5 years until he changed my heart towards myself. And understanding the truth of the gospel, that my goodness, my perfect Ryan, my good behavior would never be enough to get me into heaven. And it was through this simple statement. It's, hey, older brother, you think that heaven is for good people and hell is for bad people. But that's not how it works. Heaven is for forgiven people. And you can get forgiveness because Jesus paid for it. You get forgiveness by simply receiving the free gift that he's offering you. The father went out to the older son, and it said he pleaded with him to come inside. He's offering the free gift. Step into this party of salvation. Step into my house. And the older son, in his pride and his self-righteousness, his self-justification, refused it. But see, the gospel, the good news for the older brother is you don't see it, but the father's begging you to come to the party of his salvation. And what you don't realize is you need forgiveness for your self-righteousness. Just as much as the younger brother needs forgiveness for his sinful ways, for your self-justification, for your prideful righteousness, you need forgiveness too. And so this older brother, this is for the Pharisees and the crowd. And that's the crazy thing, is Jesus was going after them. He's saying, hey, I'm inviting you, I'm begging you, I'm pleading you to come into the party. But you refuse to listen. And so this story ends with a cliffhanger. I don't know if you noticed it. But we don't know whether the brother went in or not. We don't know if he accepted the Father's invitation and stepped into the house, stepped into the party of salvation, of assurance, life on purpose with your Creator, and assurance in heaven with him forever. If you're the older brother, If that's you tonight, what are you going to do? Are you going to step into the party? Or are you going to stay outside in your self-righteousness and your good deeds? Guys, don't leave tonight with a cliffhanger in your story. If you're the younger brother, if that's who you see in yourself, if that's who you relate to, come home. Whether you're at rock bottom or you can see you're on your way there, you can stop, you can turn around, you can come home. His arms are open wide. He's looking for you to return. What Jesus did on the cross can pay for anything you've done. All you got to do is come home. And older brothers, leave your self-righteousness and your good works behind. Put on the righteousness of Christ and let him produce good works in you. Let's go to the party. Let's join in his salvation. Let me pray. God, I thank you for this parable. I thank you for the profoundness of what you teach, of the love that you show us through this Father. I thank you for the gospel that you illustrate to both the younger brother and the older brother, Lord. I thank you for the grace that you've shown me in my own pride, my own self-righteousness, Lord, and as well in my own sin, my own younger brotherness where I have run far from you, Lord. And I pray for these men and women that as they hear this, Lord, that their hearts would be broken for wherever they stand, whoever they see themselves as, Lord. I pray that they would just bring that to the cross, that they would bring that to your feet. They would accept the free gift of forgiveness. They would accept the invitation, the pleading to come into the party, Lord. I ask you to speak that into our hearts tonight. Lord, we worship you. We know you are good, you are patient, you are gracious, you are loving towards us. And so we worship you in song. Amen.